to 11:11 at the Grotto. I'm Adam, and on behalf of all of us here, we're so thankful that you've decided to join us. Whether this is maybe your first time or you're coming back again, 11:11 is a chance for us to demystify and unpack what church can look like. We start together singing a song of praise from the book of Psalms, which are poetry and songs written in gratitude to God, asking Him for the things that we need. And then we focus in on the gospel, which is the good news and the story of Jesus. From wheels up to wheels down, this never takes more than like 10, 15 minutes. So let's get started.
God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. The just rejoice and exalt before God. They are glad and rejoice. Sing to God, chant praise to His name, whose name is the Lord. We sing God, oh God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. The Father of orphans and the defender of widows is God in His holy dwelling. God gives a home to the forsaken. He leads forth prisoners to prosperity. We sing God, oh God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. A bountiful rain you showered down, oh God, upon your inheritance. You restored the land when it languished. Your flock settled in it in your goodness. Oh God, you provided for the needy. Oh, sing God in your goodness. Oh God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. One more time, sing God. For God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. Oh God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor.
I remember growing up, one of the things that I hated the most is when we had people over for dinner. I hated it. It had nothing to do with the cooking or anything like that, but I don't know if your childhood was anything like mine, but when you had people over for dinner, that meant you had to get everything in order in the house, right? You had to clean everything, you had to put everything away, you had to make sure that everything was just right. You used the stuff in the big china cabinet that you never used. You couldn't just use regular plates and regular forks and regular cups. You had to get all the fancy stuff out. Thanksgiving, Christmases, whenever we hosted them at our house, were a nightmare for me because we had to do all of this cleaning to get our house in order. And I hated it. I hated it because of the cleaning, but also because I got relegated to the kids' table. And to me, there was nothing worse than the kids' table. Because the adult table, it's the big, long, nice table, and everyone's gathered around, and everyone's talking and having a good time, hopefully not arguing too much. But at the kids' table, you didn't know what was going on, and nobody was getting along. at the kids' table. When me and my brother and my cousins were all forced to sit at the kids' table, it was just constant bickering. But I remember Thanksgiving, I was 13, and my dad said, "Hey, why don't you come sit at the table with us?" And I got the call up to the big leagues, and I got to sit at the grown-up table for Thanksgiving. And within about 5 minutes of Thanksgiving dinner, I had managed to spill my entire drink all over the table with the nice runner, and everything is out and it looks nice. We're trying to put our best foot forward. And of course, I made an absolute mess of everything. And not my parents, but several of the grown-ups at the table immediately responded in a, we'll say, not quite so Christian fashion. Everyone was bummed. Everyone was upset that I made a mess. And several minutes later, I got demoted back to the kids' table. And I came back with my head hanging low and my tail between my legs, and every one of my younger cousins and my brother were just pointing at me. It was like, I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched that show, The Simpsons, but there's that one kid, Nelson, who's always like, ha ha! It was just a chorus of people pointing and laughing at me when I got demoted back to the kids' table. My trip to the grown-up table had lasted approximately 7.5 minutes. And at that point in my life, it was the most embarrassing 7.5 minutes of my life. I hated the grown-up table. But eventually, I grew up and I got to sit at the grown-up table, and sometimes, now that we live in Syracuse, I get to sit at the grown-up table. Sometimes, when we have dinner at my in-laws, I wind up standing in the kitchen. That's more of a preference than anything else. But there's a big deal about what happens at tables, and on the surface, when we read this week's gospel, this sounds a lot like a theme that we've been hearing for several weeks now in the gospel, which is Jesus' preference to those in need, to the poor, to the hungry, to those in need. And those absolutely apply when we hear the gospel this week. But there's something a little bit deeper in here that I don't know if I have ever taken a chance to consider until I actually sat down and read this before this weekend. So what I want to do is I want to take a chance to read it with you guys, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what maybe Jesus is also saying in this. This is from the Gospel of Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at the table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this person," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes, they may say to you, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table, for everyone who exalts themselves will be humbled. Then he said to the host who invited them, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not just invite your friends or your brothers and sisters or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." So I think on the surface, we all kind of hear what Jesus is saying here, right? And Friar Jude, actually, this morning, he told this great story of a woman named Sarah Cummins. And Sarah and her fiance were getting married. They were a young couple that came from a good family with a lot of money. And about a week before their wedding was supposed to happen, Sarah and her fiance decided to call everything off, which I'm sure devastated a lot of their family and friends. But they had paid for this huge dinner for about 200 people that cost them $30,000. And none of that money was refundable, none of that food could be returned. So what Sarah did is she gathered up her family and her friends, And they went out and they met with people in their community who were underserved or experiencing poverty and homelessness, and they invited them to come to this dinner. They just decided to have a party, and they invited all these people who they thought would enjoy it and benefit from it, even just for one night. And a lot of local businesses that provided like clothing and stuff like that went out and met with these people who were going to come and got like some of the gentlemen's suits and some of the ladies' dresses and got the kids some nicer clothes. And so they wound up throwing this extravagant dinner for these people in their community. And I don't think that maybe I need to drive home the point any more than I have over the last several weeks about the importance of service to those who are in need. Because it's really clear when we see somebody in need in a physical realm how clear that need is. We can tell when somebody is struggling physically or they're experiencing problems maybe financially, and it's easy for us to provide our support when we see those things. But oftentimes, when we're at the table, there are poor people in our midst that we don't even acknowledge and see. And it's not because we're turning our eyes blind to the poor or the marginalized, but because there is a poverty within their spirit that they are experiencing that even they can't express to the people around them. This may not be the exact same, but just kind of sharing from my own personal perspective over the last several weeks. A couple weeks ago, I wound up having a wound in my toe get infected, and I had to go to the hospital, and then the doctor decided that I needed to have it amputated because the infection was spreading to my foot, and they didn't want me to lose my foot and then my leg and so on and so forth. And so that wound up happening, and it was hard for me. I mean, physically, it's hard for me to get around and stuff like that. And I know that there are people maybe that we know, but there are definitely people in our community who've experienced way more trauma when it comes to their health and their care than maybe I have, just losing a pinky toe. I was just telling Jennifer a second ago that I didn't know how important my pinky toe was. I just thought of all the toes that maybe the big toe was the important ones. I didn't know that the pinky toe was what helps your balance when you stand. So I'm not really able to stand up on that foot as much anyway, because I'm under doctor's orders not to, and walking is off the table. But every time I've tried to stand, I tend to go a little teapot, and I just kind of tip over. But one of the things that's been hardest for me is usually every evening before I get ready for bed, there's a bandage I have to change. And it's not bad. It's not like it's bloody and gross. It's not gory. But it's been really hard for me to look at my foot and see something missing. And I was honest with my wife, Kate, the other night, that every night since I've been home from the hospital, I've cried myself to sleep. Because there's a part of me that's gone. And I had all of these feelings, and she's had all of these feelings, and these things just kind of boiled up last night, and I told her that I'm not okay. I'm hurting in my spirit in a way that I have not been able to elocute to anybody. Now, part of that's on me, because there's a lot of damage and things that I need to unwind and fix about my feeling, and I've shared this with you guys before, my feeling of being unworthy of asking for and receiving help. And in my soul, I felt like, for a long time, I was sitting towards the head of the table. I felt this closeness to God. And lately, something in me feels like I got demoted back to the kids' table spiritually. And I think what Jesus is trying to tell us when we hear this parable that he teaches, remember, when Jesus teaches in parables, he is calling us out on something, because that's what a good friend does. A good friend helps us and cares for us, but a good friend is honest with us and calls us out on our bullcrap. So definitely, in this setting where all these people are called to this nice banquet, and these Pharisees, these people of power, were all seated around a table. Remember, it says they're watching him closely. he teaches all of them to give up your seat, these seats of honor, because that's where you want to sit, and move others there so that they can be closer to God. And it literally took me until this morning, until I hobbled down here in the elevator, to realize that God cares enough about me to seat me close to him at the table. Because the benefit, the joy, the gift of being seated towards the head of the table, towards the host, is all things on that table come from where? From the host. In Jesus' time, the host would have been served first, and everything came down the table from there. Sometimes we have this idea of what like big fancy dinners look like it's Downton Abbey. Like there's this huge serving staff in tuxedos with tails, and they have white gloves, and everybody gets served at the same time together. That's not how things would have worked in Jesus' time. All good things came from the host of the table. What we are called to do, if we're even going to entertain the idea of letting Jesus be a part of our lives, is to be mindful, yes, of the poor and the marginalized, but also be aware of the poor and the marginalized of spirit. It is our duty, if we're going to say that we're Christians, to go to the people that we love, that we know, and check in and ask how they're doing. Are you okay? To hold space. You hear me say that a lot. I use this term hold space a lot. That we have room in our lives to ask those questions of the people that we love, but also be willing to hear the response and be able to accept that response without offering our feedback, without giving our suggestions until they're asked for. If you go to somebody and you ask how they're doing and they share with us what's going on in their spirit, and then they ask for our advice, be gentle with our response, but don't just jump right in to try and fix people's stuff. Sometimes it's just as important to be able to say it. When I told my wife at 11:30 last night that I'm not okay, the best thing she did was not jump on a phone and try and find me a counselor. I'm going to work on that. But she said, I know, I'm sorry. And that meant everything to me. So as we go around the tables in our lives, seeking out those who are poor, asking how they're doing, we bring them up to our seat at the table. We move them just a little bit closer to God through our words and through our actions. Because remember what the psalm just taught us, that God has a place for the poor. And hopefully we as a community can help the poor find those places. Hey, thanks again for joining us for 1111 at the Grotto. If you have any questions about the Grotto, 1111, or anything else, visit us online and connect with us at thegrotto.community.